Hi everyone, this is the lesson for area for 7.1. So many of the formulas that we're going to talk about in this video you learned in previous classes, so I think they should all be a little bit familiar with it. We're going to try to work on some of the harder problems that are often seen on your NF course tests. So let's first talk about what it means to find the area. That would be all of the space that is occupied inside the figure. So we often, or it's defined as how many square units can fit inside each shape. So the units would be based on whatever measurement the figure is being measured in. So if it was being measured in meters, it would be how many meters one by one could we fit inside that parallelogram. So, which is why we always have our units squared, but we'll get to that in a minute. So we need to know what the height is, and the height is always that line that's perpendicular to the base. So wherever your height's going to be, it's going to be perpendicular. And then the other more complicated shapes are all based off of like what it would be for a parallelogram, and that's base times height. So remember, the triangle is half of a parallelogram, so that's why that one's 1/2 base times height. And remember, your heights could be on the outside, one of the sides of the shape, or on the inside. So you want to always look for the ones that are perpendicular. And then for our trapezoid, we have 1/2 times the height times the sum of the bases. So really what you're doing there is finding the mid-segment, because half of the sum of the bases is the mid-segment, and then you're multiplying that by height. Okay, so let's get started. So for example 1, we have to figure out what kind of shape we have, and then determine what our formula is from there. So example 1's a parallelogram, so we would use just base times height, and then you have to determine which one is your base and which one's your height. So our height is always going to be perpendicular to the base. So that would mean that this line is our height, and then our base would be the bottom. So that would be 9 times 5. So the area of that parallelogram would be 45 meters squared. Because remember, that means we can fit 45 1x1 squares inside that shape. So for number 2, what kind of shape is that? Very good. It's a trapezoid. So 1/2 times the height times the sum of the bases. And remember, the 1 and 2 just denote that we have 2 different bases. It's not like adding extra numbers in there or anything. So I'm going to call my base 1, 8. My second base will be the bottom. And then my height is the perpendicular length. So from there, we would just plug in all those numbers and do order of operations. So we'd have 1/2 times 18 times 8 plus 21. So 1/2 of 18 is 9, and then 9 times 29 gives us 261 yards squared. Okay, why don't you pause your video and try examples 3 and 4. Be careful when you're finding your heights, and then when you come back, I will talk about how to find those answers. Okay, so for example 3, we had a triangle. So the triangle is 1/2 base times height. So this 26 is not needed for this problem. That's the hypotenuse. Your base and your height would be the 2 sides that are perpendicular. So we ended up with 120 yards squared. For number 4, we had another trapezoid. So we would do the same as we did for number 2. And we end up with 4,998 feet squared. Remember to circle any questions you guys have, and we'll talk about them in class. Okay, so for the next 4 examples, these problems are asking you to work backwards. They tell you what the area is, but they want you to find a missing side. So you still have to know which formula to use, but this time we're not finding the area, we're finding the side. So for number 5, we have a parallelogram again. So the area equals base times height. They told us that our area was 286. So we have 286 equals our base is x, and our height is 10. So we would solve this equation to get what the base number is. So just like any other equation, we use order of operations. So for here, we would divide by 10. So we get x equals 28.6 feet. For this one, it's not squared because we're not finding the area, we're finding a side length. So it's just feet. Another way to think about the squared for area, here we would do feet times feet. Like x times x is x squared, feet times feet is feet squared. Okay, so why don't you try number 6? Well, let's do number 7 and then you can go back and try 6. So this one's a little bit more complicated because the trapezoid formula is a little bit more complicated. So remember the formula is half times the height times the sum of the bases. So if we plug in everything we know, we have 153 equals 1/2 times 9 times x plus 20. So I would do half of 9 first. So we have 153 equals 4.5 times x plus 20. So from here, there's a couple different ways you can do it. I would divide by 4.5 first instead of distributing because then we won't have to divide later. So it's like one less step to do if we do it now. So divide by 4.5 to get that out of there. So we end up with 34 equals x plus 20. So then we would just have to subtract. So x equals 14 inches. Okay, so go ahead and pause and try examples 6 and 8, and when you come back, I will show you the answers, and we'll do our last 2 questions. Okay, so for 6, we had another parallelogram. So we used our base height formula, and we ended up with 11. And then for number 8, it was a triangle. This 3 here is extra information that you don't really need to know. Remember, our height would be this perpendicular one, and then the base is just 12. So we end up with 10 centimeters for your height there. Okay, so our last 2 examples are getting a little bit more complicated still. For these problems, we are trying to find the area of just the shaded region. So it's like having this parallelogram, but then cutting out a triangle. So what's going to be left? So for many of these, you would just find the area of what the entire shape is, and then take away the part that we're cutting out. There are some of these that are a little bit more complicated than that, like you'd be adding pieces, but we'll work on some of those in class. So first I'm going to find the area of the parallelogram. And whenever I have to do more than one area, I always number the shapes, or I draw the symbol, like what it is, so I know which one I'm working on. So that's base times height, so 16 times 20. So the area of that whole thing is 320 inches squared. So now for the triangle, the area is half base times height. I wrote them backwards, but it's okay. So half of 16 is 8, so that would be 64. So to find just the shaded part, we would take those away. So 320 minus 64 gives us 256 inches squared. So that would be the area of just the shaded part. So again, we found the area of the whole thing, found the area of the unshaded part, or that triangle that's in there, and subtracted them to find what was left. Okay, so for our last example, it's the same process. The only difference here is that they didn't necessarily give you those numbers. They told you how far it went in. Okay, so if the whole thing was 8, but we went in 1 inch on each side, what's going to be the measure of the box on the inside? Good, that would be 6 centimeters. Same idea here. The whole thing was 6, but we went in 1 centimeter on that side and 1 centimeter on that side, so we would have 4 centimeters left over there. So break it into pieces. Find the area of the whole thing and the area of the part that you're taking away, and then subtract to see what you have left. So go ahead and pause your video. When you come back, I will show you the answer. Okay, so for these ones I labeled it outside and inside. You could have done it whatever you wanted. So the outside was 8 times 6. The inside was 6 times 4. So we ended up having 24 centimeters squared for the area of the shaded piece. So make sure you write down any questions you have and ask in class tomorrow.